Well, we're in for a little FaceTime this morning. There's all about faces in the gospel lesson today. And indeed, there is something about the face. Communication theorists suggest that as much as 95% of our communication is nonverbal. In other words, most of what we say and most of the way we interpret what others say comes not from the words themselves, but from facial expressions, body language, and in the inflections of our voice. It's why electronic communication is so fraught with potential for misunderstanding. You see, our faces reveal much about ourselves, and we look to someone's face to reveal something about themselves. We look at someone's face and wonder what they're upset about, or what they're happy about, or what they're thinking about so deeply. We can look at their face and wonder what burdens they carry and what hopes and dreams propel them. In our first lesson this morning, Moses' face is shining, but it's not from some recent facial, not from coating his face with baby oil, not from too much wine or too much sun, and not from being in love. Moses' face shines because he's in the presence of God. The divine presence has a physical effect on him. And when he comes down from the mountain, his shining face strikes fear and terror into the Israelites. And so Moses has to put a veil over his face when he talks to the Israelites. And he takes it off then when he goes to have FaceTime with God. In the gospel lesson, when Jesus was on the mountain with Moses and Elijah, that was a transcendent and wondrous and mysterious FaceTime between Moses and Elijah and Jesus. Luke tells us that Jesus' appearance changed. The original Greek says that the appearance of his face became other. But unlike Moses, it's not something outside that made Jesus' face change, to glow, to shine, and to radiate light. Jesus' glory has an inner quality. It's something of his essence. It's something of his being. Jesus himself is divine, God among us. And his face changed for the sake of those disciples in order to confirm for them that Jesus is God among us. Luther was fond of saying that apart from Jesus, we can only see God's backside. Now think about that. When we see someone's backside, we might know that it's them, but we don't know if they're mad or glad or sad or anything else. We only know that it's probably them, and if we want to see what they're feeling, what they are like, how they might act towards us, we need them to turn around so we can see their face. And Luther said that in Jesus, we see God's face. We see what God is like in Jesus. We see that God is not an angry, vengeful, capricious judge. We see in Jesus that God is full of grace and mercy and love. And the glowing face of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration serves to remind us of that and to put an exclamation point behind it. After Luke tells us about Jesus' glowing countenance, he goes on to mention one other detail that none of the other Gospels tell us. He tells us what Moses and Elijah and Jesus were talking about. They were talking about, as our translation says, his departure. The word is more properly, I would suggest, translated his exodus. His exodus. Just before this transfiguration scene, and again just after, Jesus will predict his suffering and death, his exodus. And while his glowing face and his clothes are a dramatic confirmation of his divine identity, he will not do his greatest work in a dazzling display of shining face and shining clothes. From now on, the opposition will build. And Jesus' entire ministry will be a laser-sharp focus toward the salvation he will accomplish through his death and resurrection. And his exodus into the darkness of the grave will be for us a dazzling display of our own redemption from sin and death. Look at this famous painting now from the Italian Renaissance painter Raphael. You see at the top of the painting the glory of the Transfiguration. But you see also at the bottom of the painting this frenzied and frenetic and chaotic scene. Raphael portrays in this painting the last half of that story from our gospel lessons. You see, stuck at the foot of the mountain is this sick boy and his father in a crowd. The disciples have tried to heal the boy, and they have been unsuccessful. And you can see frustration palpable in the outstretched arms and the panicked faces of the crowd. And yet in the midst, there are two figures pointing in the direction of the mountain, toward the sky. Two figures pointing to Jesus, arrayed in white, shining face. The glow of Jesus' face and clothes lasts only a brief moment. And as we heard in the reading today, Jesus comes down from the mountain and he heals the boy. Raphael provides a good reminder to the church on this Transfiguration Sunday that even as we see the dazzling divine identity of Jesus and are pointed to his cruciform exodus, we also are called to point to Jesus in the midst of a frenzied and frenetic and chaotic world. We point to Jesus because we know that in him is healing and resurrection and hope and the sustaining kind of power, the kind of life that the world yearns for but doesn't really know where to find. It's tempting for us to believe that the world is beyond saving, that disaster persists and brokenness and sin and injustice threaten us all over the place. Hope wanes even among faithful people. The Transfiguration, dear church, is a dramatic reminder that God is at work transforming and redeeming all of creation that now suffers and is broken. Shown in glory with Moses and Elijah, one representing the law and the other the prophets, Jesus is revealed as the culmination of the story of a God who comes again and again to rescue God's people. This morning, through the gifts of word and water and bread and wine, through our prayer and fellowship, through our service and our work for justice and peace, the cloud of Jesus' glory envelops weary disciples. And here in the one we see on the Mount of Transfiguration comes the one who has the power to overcome death for us. And then we are called to gladly bear witness in this community to the saving work of God. Years ago, I was walking the hall of the local shopping mall, and there off in the distance, I caught sight of a little toddler girl walking towards me. I didn't really pay too much attention to the girl until all of a sudden I noticed that her face dramatically changed in a moment. All of a sudden, a huge smile broke out on this child's face, and her eyes suddenly were full of sparkle, and she began to run like crazy towards something or someone behind me. I turned, and just before she jumped into a man's arms, she screamed, "Daddy!" Before I had any idea that she was running towards her daddy, I knew that her face was full of love. Dear church, that's the kind of witness we are called to give to a suffering and broken world. In a few moments, we will come to the table, and then we will be sent out, fed and nourished, revived by grace and lifted by hope. We will hear the words that Aaron spoke as the children of Israel were about to cross over into the promised land. You will hear them spoken, and then again you will hear them sung by the choir. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord's face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Amen.